Welcome to the American Institute of Architects Kansas City Chapter's Legends and Leaders program. This series highlights AIA architects and others that have helped shape our community, lead the AIA, and mentor new generations of designers. Frank Zilm's career has spanned architecture, planning, education, and service to the AIA. After receiving undergraduate degrees in liberal arts and architecture from the University of Kansas, Frank earned a doctorate in architecture from the University of Michigan. He returned to the Kansas City area in 1976 after practicing healthcare architecture in San Francisco and on the West Coast. Establishing a planning and programming firm, Dr. Zilm has led over 300 healthcare planning projects throughout the world, including prestigious clients such as MD Anderson Cancer Center, the Cleveland Clinic, and the University of Cincinnati. As an expert on emergency department design, he organized lectures and courses at Harvard, Cambridge, Cornell, and other universities. Frank developed and directed the Architecture Management Program at the University of Kansas Regents Center in Overland Park, Kansas in the mid-1980s. In 2009, he worked with Kent Spreckelmeyer to create the KU Institute for Health and Wellness Design in Lawrence, Kansas, where he then taught for 15 years. He has published numerous articles on creativity and healthcare design. Active with the AIA early in his career, Frank served as the president of Kansas City Chapter, as well as president of the Academy on Architecture for Health, the Kansas City Architecture Foundation, and the Academy on Architecture for Health Foundation. Frank was recognized as the Distinguished Alumni by the KU School of Architecture and Design in 1993 and was also awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the American College of Healthcare Architects in 2014 and the Russ Coyle Lifetime Achievement Award from the Center for Health Design in 2021. Let's meet Frank. Welcome to Kansas City AIA's Legends and Leaders program on interviewing important people that have made a significant contribution to Kansas City's architecture and the field of architecture. So today we're interviewing Frank Zilm, who is also our fearless leader in this project. So thanks, Frank. We've been looking forward to interviewing you. Glad to have you here today.
Well, thanks, Cindy. This is fun, but I'm not used to being on this side of the camera.
It's good for you. It'll be fun. So, Frank, we always start with this question, and you know it well, which is, what got you interested in becoming an architect?
Well, there's a family story that goes back to when I was young, and my older sister, who was and is more talented than I was, stole my building blocks. And while I was building walls, she was building castles, houses, and fortresses. And so apparently as revenge, I announced that I was going to be an architect. And I think there's a little bit of truth to that, but like so many of the people we have interviewed, I became interested in architecture at a very early age. In high school, I read Frank Lloyd Wright's Testament. The Cernan Arch was under construction. There was architectural drafting classes that I did pretty good at. But there was one problem. When I graduated from high school, my parents had been separated when I was very young. And so my mother, who was a very bright, hardworking person, was working in the 50s and 60s when it was perfectly legal to pay women less than men for the same work. So while she worked hard, we were always struggling financially. So I knew I couldn't go and afford to go to a college and school of architecture. So I enrolled in a community college. And fortunately, the instructor, when I told him I wanted to be an architect, told me that I needed to get into an architecture school, that I would get out of sequence with the design studios and I would get discouraged. So he said, go visit a school of architecture. So shortly after that, I went down to Lambert Field, I bought a ticket, and I took my first airline flight in my life on a TWA Constellation. I flew from Lambert Field to the downtown airport, and I walked across the Broadway Bridge, and I hitchhiked down old US 40 through Kansas City, Kansas, out to Lawrence. And I came back and I applied for application, and I applied for financial aid, and I got admitted to KU. But in July, before school was going to start, I got a letter saying there was no financial aid. So I didn't know what I was going to do, but I took a chance. And I called the Kansas City chapter of the AIA, the St. Louis chapter of the AIA. And I asked if they had any kind of aid, and they said they had a scholarship loan program, but no one had applied for it. And because of the high attrition rate in the freshman year, it wasn't offered to freshmen. So I asked if I could meet with the scholarship committee, and I met with them, and I left with enough money to start school. And so I learned three things from that. I think one is that risk equals reward. You have to be willing to take chances if you're going to get anywhere. Second was that the AIA was an organization I needed to learn something about and get more involved in. And the third thing was that there were good people out there that could serve as a model for me.
So you decided to go to the University of Kansas, and it was during a very heady time, the 1960s. Did you have some influences or mentors there that you say played a significant role in your career?
Yeah, the 60s and early 70s in college was a very interesting period of time. There was the Vietnam War issues, there was civil rights issues going on, and I turned out to get very interested in the politics of the time, probably more than I should have. But I was student body vice president and then became the first, and as far as I know, the only student presiding officer of the university senate. And I got very interested in how big decisions are made, you know, and how do we work with that? So that was when I decided to pursue dual degrees and pursue a degree in sociology, really focusing on small group dynamics. You know, how do people make decisions? At the same time, there was a new faculty member that joined the school by the name of Fount Smothers. And the other faculty kind of jokingly referred to him as the Methodist minister, because he believed very strongly that for us to be effective as a profession, we needed to become more methodological and more comfortable with using analytical tools to complement our design capabilities. And that tied in very closely with what I was interested in. So I would trundle down to the computing center with key punch cards and try to understand what computers were. I remember one faculty member coming up to me at my desk with my deck of cards and said, well, you know, this computer stuff is really interesting, but you'll never teach a computer to draw. And so fortunately, I was able to get into the University of Michigan in the doctoral program and just exploded. I was able to take full advantage at that time and really focus in on the issue of analytical tools, how they could be applied. And since I was always, again, looking for financial aid, I took a job at the medical center and just fell in love with healthcare architecture, because you're working with really, really bright, dedicated people. You've got some really complex technological problems you need to deal with. And then there's a human side of it. How do you make it an interesting, and how do you make it safe for patients and families and reduce some of the stress? So that's when I really got interested in healthcare architecture.
What a great story, though, having gone up to the University of Michigan and then discovering that. It was a good marriage of your technical and as well as your planning thinking. So you came back, you began then your career in San Francisco and then later returned to Kansas City, or came to Kansas City, since you were from St. Louis, and began your own firm in healthcare planning. Why don't you tell a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting story. Yes, I was hired to work in San Francisco with the firm of Stone, Marasini and Patterson, which at that time was one of the premier healthcare architecture firms in the country, and had a research division. Well, this is 1974, so that's a pretty unusual experience. And I had a great experience there for a couple of years, but the dean of the School of Architecture convinced me to come back and take a dual job teaching in the school and also directing planning at the medical center. And I learned very quickly that I didn't have the kind of skills and experience to really be effective in the planning position. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then I resigned. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but my wife at that time was taking a drawing class at the Art Institute at night. And she struck up a conversation with the person sitting next to her, who happened to be Clarence Kivett. And so Clarence said, come by and talk to me. And so I went by, and he didn't offer me a job, but he made it very clear that if I wasn't successful as a healthcare consultant, I would be personally disappointing him. So I, shortly after that, incorporated with a woman architect, Corla Dor, who's a member of our chapter. And at that, this again, as Cindy, as you know, this is 1978. Having a co-ownership with a woman architect was a relatively unusual position to be in. But we went out aggressive, and we went after big projects, and we got the first 7 projects in a row that we went after, and we never looked back.
Well, Frank, then you had your own firm in Kansas City that was doing healthcare planning and around the whole country. What were some of the most notable projects you got these first 7 clients? Did you work with them for a long time, or how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I used to joke that in my definition of sustainability is you kept a client for more than one project. And we were very fortunate. One of our first clients was the University of Cincinnati, and I worked for them for 30 years. University of New Mexico, worked with them for 15 years. We, as a small firm, felt it was very important to be able to sustain and keep clients rather than having to perpetually market. And I really think one of the keys to that was that we established a trusting relationship with them. And when I talk to students, I always try to tell them there's a very interesting book that was written in the 1990s by an author named David Maister about the trusted advisor. And he said, if you have a trusting relationship, clients are going to give you latitude. They're going to want to continue to work with you. And he talked about all the different dimensions, but at one point he gets it down to a formula, which is just delightful. He says, trust equals CRI, competence, you know what you're doing, reliability, you can be counted on, and intimacy, your willingness to say what you think. And that all makes sense. But then he says, take that whole thing and divide it by self-interest. And if you are perceived as primarily being self-interested, you're never going to get that trusting relationship. And I think part of our success was we really, really cared about the success of our clients. And we had a business, and we made money, but we really thought that our success depended on the ability for us to have successful clients.
Well, later then you started the KU, and within the School of Architecture's program, you started the Institute of Health and Wellness in Lawrence at the main campus. What made you start that, and what's been the contributions that have come out of it?
Yeah, that's been a great experience. About 15 years ago now, Ken Spreckelmeyer approached me, the new chairman of the Department of Architecture, was interested in doing something in terms of healthcare. And at that time, the curriculum model had a 4-year core curriculum and then a 5th year that allowed different paths that you could pursue. So Kent approached me about creating a model for that 5th year path that would focus on health and wellness. And it was just a great opportunity. We created an internship model that we gave them background information about the knowledge, the terminology, the technology, prototypes, and then we sent them out for 7 months in a healthcare architecture firm. And then we brought them back for the final studio where they would work again on a complex healthcare problem, typically do competitions. They were excellent in competitions. And the funny thing I always like to talk about is that when we sent them out on the 7-month internship after their 4th year, they knew the pieces of it. They didn't necessarily know how they fit together. But when they came back for the last semester, they knew how to work as a team. I mean, they had learned how to work effectively as a team, and so they were almost a little scary in terms of how efficient they could assign responsibilities, meet obligations, know how to put stuff together. And so we have just celebrated our 15th year. We've had a little bit over 200 students go through the program. The vast majority of them were offered jobs immediately from the firm they did their internships with. And it's kind of fun now to see many of them advancing and doing very well within their firms.
Well, there's only like 4 programs like that in the country, I think. And so it was pretty rare that what you put together. Yeah. So some congratulations on that as well. In the late 80s, I think 89, you and I started the Architectural Foundation, Kansas City Architectural Foundation, KCAF. Had special meaning for you because you were a scholarship recipient, as you mentioned earlier, but it's gone from 1 to 14 scholarships this last year. So it's really blossomed over these last 30 years. What made you interested in doing that? Why don't you say a little bit about your relationship with that?
Yeah, well, I tell people that are interested in applying for AIA fellowship is that my understanding is that the review process focuses not on the titles that you've had in your positions, but what you've actually done. And in the late 80s, you were actively involved in this. We set up the scholarship program. We started out, I always tell the story, one of our first recipients was a young female architecture student at KU named Diamond Williams. And she is now Diamond Bronson and serves on the board of our chapters. So it's really exciting to see how that's evolved.
Full circle.
Full circle. And we started out with one scholarship, and I think now, if my memory is correct, they award 14 a year. I think about $40,000, $50,000 a year. So we did that at the local level. On the national level, I was president of the AIA Academy of Architecture for Health around the same period, and we set up some similar things in terms of national scholarships and research awards and opportunities for students to participate in our meetings and our conventions and get hopefully interested in healthcare architecture. So the AIA chapter is fabulous. We have been blessed with outstanding directors, Dawn Taylor, Don Kirkwood, Linda Young, and it's just been a pleasure to work with everyone in the local chapter.
Well, you've been a great contributor to AIA Kansas City, and then also, as you mentioned, at the national level. So again, thanks for the work you've done in this area. I'm wondering if you have any outside interests or hobbies that you think have contributed to your career, or the things that you've done outside of architecture.
Well, there's a couple of things I've tried to squeeze in with all the other obligations that I've had. I feel it's very important to try to stay as healthy as possible. And so I've exercised, I run, I always joke that I'm a middle of the pack guy, but I got a lot out of it. And there's some interesting research that I think ties into that. Most of the studies indicate we, as architects, reach our peak in terms of creativity in our 50s and 60s. And that comes from the ability to store and retrieve long-term memory of patterns, objects, experiences, and bring those to the problem and then play with them in your conscious mind. There's a part of the brain called the hippocampus that's critical in terms of that storage and retrieval. And so there's a lot of research that shows that exercise really reduces the risk of atrophy of that hippocampus as we age. So I think that's an important thing, in addition just to being able to deal with the stresses of the work that it takes. And the other hobby I like is photography, because I just enjoy the ability to selectively take pictures and then be able to look and try to understand things. And the whole idea of how to compose a picture makes you really study the object that you're looking at, the building you're looking at, very well. So I think that's been a good experience.
Well, Frank, what would you give? What advice would you give to young architects that are just coming into the field?
Okay, well, I have 3 suggestions for consideration. One is celebrate your successes. You know, there's a part of our brain that's pre-wired to alert us to fear and danger. And there's a lot of things in our culture right now, particularly social media, that try to enrage and engage. And I think it's really important to get in a habit to stop and appreciate what you've accomplished in life, in your professional life, in your personal life, and celebrate it. You know, I don't think we do a good enough job of that. So I'd say celebrate your successes. Second thing is that when we talk about risk equals reward, that means that the risk side of it is sometimes you're going to fail. And the important thing is to not see it as some kind of character flaw, to not try to assign guilt and responsibility to somebody else, or try to say, I'll never do that again. The important thing is to learn from it, and so that when you're in a similar situation, you'll be better prepared to deal with it. So that would be the second thing that I would suggest. Yeah. And the third thing is, it's not about you. It's not about you. Your success is going to depend as much on your ability to collaborate, to network, and to make other people successful as it is on your personal skills and capabilities. So those would be the 3 things I would suggest.
Well, Frank, you've exhibited all 3 of those. So you've been a great contributor here in Kansas City and in your area of healthcare planning. And We appreciate you coming and talking with us today and all of the work you've done on this committee as well.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.